Well, hello and good morning, everybody. How you doing? This is Jeremiah, and it is webinar time. We have a very good webinar today. This is such a just great example of really probably one of the more fun things we get to do is just interacting with such a huge variety of firms around the country, around the world, just the vastness that is landscape architecture. And this webinar is absolutely a product of that, of just hearing of the sorts of things that people are doing and needing to push the software to kind of what they're after. And we end up learning a lot. And this is going to be a very educational webinar because it's really showing off something that's as much educational as it is showing the software. So get ready for some really fun stuff. I just have a couple super quick housekeeping items, and then we'll get rolling here. I recommend clicking that Q&A button. That's the question and answer button down at the bottom of your screen right now. And just get that question box situated because that'll let you see any answers that we type in to other questions that people ask. So it's kind of a good companion, so you can kind of see what other people are asking. But also, just as you think of a question, please type it in. We're going to be addressing questions at the end. So, as you get your questions, get them all in, and we're going to get them all queued up and go through and answer them all at the end. But of course, I'll type in some answers initially to them, primarily so we don't get the same question asked over and over. So if you're watching that Q&A box, you'll kind of see, oh, they're going to answer that one at the end. I don't need to ask it. And let's see. I like to click that view options at the top in case I need to get to the exit full screen mode. Just know where that is. Otherwise, this is being recorded, so you're going to be able to watch it again as soon as about Monday. We'll have it posted on the website. So that's all of my yibber yabber. I'm going to get this handed over to Amanda.
Thanks, Jared. Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Amanda Berry, in-house landscape architect here, and we're going to kind of start this off by, I'll confess, this slide's photo wasn't actually designed. You might be able to tell, but it points to the intent of modular planting design, I think. It's a natural show of color and texture, and it's a thriving plant community. And if you're curious, this was actually the super bloom in California this year, out in Carrizo Plains. So today's topic is something I've actually been exploring more since starting here at LandFX in 2015. And it's a technique that I know a lot of you were taught in school by your own mentors. So we're focusing today on a quick intro of what it is, modular planting design, how to do it well, and how to use the tools in LandFX. So because modular planting design is evolving as technology and software like LandFX and research and what works and doesn't work grows, basically, that's kind of all the things that we're going to be going through. It's really an exciting dive into horticulture and landscape design altogether. That's kind of modular planting. We're going to cover what this is and how it's typically presented in a construction plan. Then we'll explore why you should be using it more. The key here, of course, is some possible cost savings, saving time, and also improving your reputation in general. So let's kind of get into it. First, I'm no master of the horticulture side of this yet, and given the style, as you'll see, quite frankly, I think it's probably hard to say that anybody can ever claim mastery. But I've learned from a few who've literally wrote the book on it, and they are really, really, really skilled from what I've seen on especially Thomas Rainer and Claudia West's blog, and if you kind of go into that, this webinar kind of draws a lot from that book, as well as that planting design handbook. You might have one that's orange, second edition from school. I actually found, I have the orange edition as well. I found that in this new third edition, it had a lot more to do with plant mixes and communities and horticulture. So if you have the second edition, I would actually say it's worth buying the third edition. So pick those up and you can explore more after today's webinar. So kind of in a nutshell, so you know what we're aiming for today. What is modular planting? This is kind of my explanation. We're making a plant mix that it focuses on the community of the species, their form, the aesthetics, and of course the human connection. And we're basically taking these two modules off to the left, creating those modules and combining them in a way that creates what you see on the right as the end product, of course. These are some of the principles that come from a lot of those resources that I talked about. I'm distilling these principles, but they are so critical. Read through them on this slide, and of course we're recording this, so you can come back to them whenever you want. Too often I feel we're planning based on texture and looks as landscape architects and landscape designers, and the end design needs maintenance like mulch, aggressive weekly weeding, and seasonal soil nutrient additives to keep what we've planted alive for this, this tiny little island of plants that we've made that might not belong there. Designing in this way, not just in modules, but the whole concept behind what makes a good module and a good mix, gives us an opportunity to look more closely at the plant relationships and create truly sustainable planting. And as I've been reading, and I totally agree, but it could make an entire other webinar, this next statement, it doesn't have to be all native. It really just has to work. So while native is obviously usually a good thing, sometimes you can explore and go into varieties and different species maybe that might not naturally belong there, but it works on the site. It works in the conditions. That's what's important here. And I kind of include this slide to explain the principles on the last slide. So first of all, when you create a mix, we're going to be talking about how I created that mix on that first slide. They have to be able to live together in similar conditions, of course. So that's why we're saying it doesn't necessarily have to be native. If it can survive in the similar conditions, you need to make that call on what's important for the type of mix that you're making. But the important part is that they don't overlap niches. And what is the problem that we're avoiding here is that in a monoculture kind of massing of the same species of plant, we've all seen it, it's all over the place. You end up having to space those plants out quite a bit from each other, which creates a lot of empty niches in between the plants that weeds like to grow in. So we fill in all that space with mulch so it looks all clean and tidy and nice. And the principle here is that when you're doing the planting design of one of these mixes or modules, that you should be filling all of the niches so that there is no need for additional mulch in order to sustain and allow the plants to thrive. And that if you look over here at, especially in this kind of corner over here, you've got a lot of plants that are about the same kind of height. And what we want to do is start to fill in all of these niches. So these guys would kind of be in a niche. These guys would be in a niche because they're a bit taller. And you have, especially in this plant, the roots are pulling nutrients from here, this level. This plant's pulling it from this level. This plant's pulling it from this level. So they can actually bunch together quite tightly, outcompete any other weed that might want to try and join the party. And completely thrive as if there's no plant next to them, because in their world they have no competition right next to them. The plant right next to them is taking nutrients and sunlight from a different level. So that's what we're aiming for. We're trying to create those communities and in a aesthetic way that has a human connection. So let's kind of look at that. So when you're building a species list for one of these mixes, this is what you want to look at as you're trying to categorize different species in order to figure out how to build it. So if we look at that last slide, you'll see you have some tall plants over here. This is more of if we kind of go here, this is more of a grassland archetype up here. I'll explain that a bit below in a moment, but we have these tall plants here. We have these kind of middle plants that have a lot of show. And then we have these low plants that would pretty much fill across the entire thing. And they all kind of take light from different locations, so they don't compete with each other. They can kind of go next to each other. So when you're looking at one of these archetypes, like a grassland, you're going to basically look at all the layers or niches of that archetype. So you have on basically grassland, shrubland, and forest. Those are three very simple ways to organize this. You can explore different ways if you like, but these are kind of some of the established and researched ones. You have an upper, a middle, and a lower niche. Really easy way to think about it. So in that grassland, you have that upper structural layer, which is the tall grasses or the very tall echinacea. You have a seasonal theme layer, which would be some of those mid-level flowering clusters. And these guys would kind of cluster together. These guys would be all on their own, pretty much. And these guys would just be scattered pretty evenly, this ground cover layer throughout the whole thing. And then pretty much in all of these, I've only listed it in grassland, but quite frankly, time plays a factor into all of these because you need to think about plants that leaf out before others, especially when you're starting to look at the forest layer. Plants that leaf out before others, plants that flower at different times. Those are some things to start to think about as you pull together your entire plant palette for each different module that you're making. So if we keep going, you end up with, this is kind of like what is inspiring this entire design aesthetic. I kind of pulled out this because it really shows you have these clumping groups kind of crisscrossing their way throughout the landscape. You have a solid underlayer kind of going through. This is in Ireland. And what it you end up having is kind of an infill, as you see here, because I mean, this keeps happening kind of throughout, but it looks quite natural on a larger scale. But then I also wanted to kind of mention on this is that you can make one mix, but as you can see in a lot of natural places and a lot of places with maybe some human interaction, you end up having quite hard edges or maybe some more filtered edges from one archetype to the next, or from one archetype like a shrubland like this to a paved road. You have an edge, and you can tell usually the species relate between these two areas, the interior and the edge, but the mix of the species completely changes as you progress to the edge. And this is really helpful to think about when you're designing these, because one thing that can help people who are interacting with your site accept what you're doing and the design that you're doing, which can very quickly become unruly and look messy, is if you provide an edge, it usually signals to people that this design is taken care of. And even though it might end up looking more wild than a traditional garden, they get that impression from that change at the edge, which might be a bit more orderly, that this is a beautiful space. And they can start to appreciate the design that's happening there, whether it's natural or you made it. So we're kind of aiming for something like that. How can it help? And I kind of say this, I mean, like, other than plain old looking better, and that's a personal opinion. Obviously, aesthetics vary from designer to designer. I quite like the look of all of this. But it also has some other benefits other than that. For instance, I find, especially with the tools that we're going to go over today, you end up saving time designing, or at least I did. And by saving time, you can pocket that, or you can dedicate more time to maybe honing your craft, research a new mix. That can be good for this area or that area. You can fuss about the form of the space, the experience of the transitions in your landscape design, the spatial structure to create enclosure and focus. You can play with the dynamics, and you can experiment more with the palette for the moods created by color even. It can really make design fun again if you like the conceptual design stage, this entire technique. And then kind of that last point on saving time, how much time do you want to spend with a new employee training, spacing each plant? How do you place symbols and nuances of communication of a construction document? And maybe the fear of having to train somebody is holding you back from getting the help you want or need to grow your business. I'm basically saying these techniques can help with that too. You can, especially as you scale this up, save the client a bit of money. You can use a lot of smaller sizes. And you might even use seed. And I've done some designs, by the way, with stormwater ponds where we didn't necessarily use this technique, but we did use a technique where we used a lot more seedlings and seed mix, and the result basically cost the client half of what it normally cost for a stormwater planting plan. They got 10 times more plants. The whole thing survived a beaver attack in the second year. It was quite impressive. So I think that is a really good reason for this one. And lastly, you can really build your reputation. As you get that more time to research mixes, you can kind of build that. So some quick tips. You can kind of read through all of these. Those two photos on the side, again, are actually mine. The bottom one is some wild peas that I saw growing on the side of the road, actually on the 46. We were just driving by and we stopped and grabbed a photo. It speaks to what this is. That's what we're aiming for. So you can walk around, you can stop your car, you can take some photos. You never know when that's going to help you with it when you're trying to use this kind of technique as an inspiration. And you can kind of read through all of the other ideas that I had here. But mostly you're going to be focusing on those naturally occurring communities. So let's kind of go into the important part of today, which is we've learned about what it is, we've learned about why it's important. Now let's learn how to do it. And for me, quite honestly, making this mix part is the fun part. And it kind of reminds me of why I decided I'd always be happy being a landscape architect. It's really, really fun. So let's get into it. So first, I've got this site off to the left. I am calling it a campus, and I have decided that it is in Georgia, just for the kind of story of how this design got put together. So I've kind of looked at this site plan that we've created. We've designed the spaces for people walking through and interacting with the site. The buildings are tall, and it's a very enclosed area, almost like a courtyard. So based on all of those factors, I decided to go with a forest archetype because it would kind of continue. The buildings would kind of create that shade, and the forest, the upper canopy of the forest would continue that shade across, and it would almost be like entering an enclosed forest, I felt. So you could easily call it a valley and do a grassland type in here. This, of course, is where being a landscape architect becomes fun because you can make those kinds of choices. But I went and tried to get some inspiration of what kind of forest I wanted. And let's say that since this campus, this fictional campus, is in Georgia, I went around to a bunch of sites nearby. I kind of found this. And this might be the thing that I want to emulate. It's Cercis canadensis, eastern redbud. It goes by many names. But took this snapshot. This is the kind of natural environment I want to, the word is to inspire my design. That's what I want to do. So I'm looking at, in this photo, I'm looking at the redbud itself. I'm looking at the canopy trees in the background. I'm looking at the understory as well. And I kind of included the photo up at the top to say, this is typically how we might do something like this, and use this particular plant, is put it in a bed all by itself with some mulch. But we can do so much more. So that's what we're gonna do today. So I've identified, I've got my canopy layer. I've got, I've kind of included the redbud a little bit as a shrub layer, a little bit as a canopy layer. I'm playing with the rules. And then we've got that herbaceous ground cover layer. And so basically from this photo, and possibly if I were able to go on site, I would investigate more as to what these species are. I just had a photo. So actually in this case, I recognized the white ash. And so I tried to find some forest, known forest, natural forests that have white ash and redbud. Because I felt like this was natural. And I happened to strike gold on Google. So I was easily able to help me identify all the other species that are in this photo by actually just searching on Google white ash and Cercis forest, and came up with that's how we came up with Georgia. It was Natural Communities of Georgia. And so that kind of gave me the rest of it, because I saw the tree in the background. I was like, that looks like a maple, but I've never seen it before, because I actually haven't been to Georgia. But have I? No, I haven't. But I found on the list that it's actually a chalk maple. And so we're starting to build a community. I started to grab the list. I grabbed some of those understory plants as well, and I created a module. I'll kind of talk to you about how I created this module and the tricks I did to create it. But I wanted to create, right now today we're doing an easy one. It's just a rectangle. You can go wild with the shape. Obviously, the more complicated it might be to install for a contractor to install. So a rectangle is pretty easy. The longer they are, usually the more varied repetition you get, instead of, you don't want it to look like a grid. Those are all the species. And really quick, before we kind of go into the CAD side, I wanted to point out that some of these are actually varieties, and that I played a little bit from the natural species that would be in this area. Since I found that normally, and also you learn a lot this way, this redbud, normally I associate redbud with wetter locations, but I found that, especially with these kind of species in the background, this is actually a dry site. So that's why everybody uses this plant. It's quite versatile. So it's a dry alkaline site. So that is what kind of came with all of these species. That's how I got them. But for instance, I went with a taller iris so that it would stick out a bit. And this is the part where you're trying to make that human connection. You want people to be able to recognize the patterns so that it's easier for them to understand the design and appreciate it. And that's part of this. So I kind of put kind of swaths of that iris. I mostly did grass. The anemone I scattered as it would be naturally. And then I also did some swaths of the false Solomon seal, because it's a bit taller, and grouped the regular Solomon seal around those to give it some emphasis. So let's see. Oh, that's if you guys need to contact us, but let's go to CAD. That's my cue to go to CAD. So let's go into here. We talked about all that. How did we get here? So I've kind of got this. Here's how I did this. I basically started off with bringing in all of my species into my plant manager. And I specifically put them into my plant manager over here. So I have my trees, my 3 trees. I just limited it to 3, obviously, because this is a smaller site. For a larger site, I might go with more of the tree species that were actually found in that type of forest. But I also filled in all of my shrubs in here by clicking new and adding them from the database. And then I edited them and gave them their correct size and also a symbol. And I actually chose for symbols our diagrammatic symbols that come with land effects by default. So you can kind of play around with those. They work really well for identifying plants in a complicated mix like this. And so I basically kind of started with a rectangle. Oh, I didn't want to copy that. I wanted to move it. I started with a rectangle and I took my base layer, which was my grass, and I placed that at one corner. And then I grabbed my triangular array and I clicked on that. And yes, I did want 0.3 meters. That's about 1 foot between plants, and I wanted it to be exact. And so I clicked OK, and I right-clicked to accept that, and I kind of went across the entire thing. And then kind of clicked that down, cleaned it up, got rid of the excess. And then what I did was I took the rest of my palette, so let's go with anemone. I just double-clicked to place as well very quickly. But if we kind of go in here, I just kind of clicked examples. So there's one, and I'm using my shortcut keys, and I'm hitting E to change plants quickly without having to go back and grab them. And you can see it go down the list. So I placed examples of all of these, and I went up to FX planting and match plant properties. And I basically grabbed the ones, I started with my structural plants. So we went with, let's go with, the crested iris was the most pronounced one. So there's my crested iris as my example, and my destination. I kind of went bing, bang, boom, and all the way through, and kind of just a few of these, obviously. I don't want to overemphasize it. And I actually chose, sorry, I forgot to say at the beginning, I chose the size of a pattern because it was the size of my Cercis. And I actually chose, again, a variety of Cercis canadensis. I really recommend checking it out. It was so beautiful. So I kind of chose the size so that it would relate, so that I could have kind of one of these per module. And then basically what I wanted to do was also have one larger tree, probably per 2 modules, in order to space it correctly. And I got rid of some of these, and I kept match propertying until I got this. So obviously, the smaller that you get, the better. So how did I actually, the module down here basically is my edge. So I wanted a cleaner edge with only my low species to signal that transition. So I did the exact same thing, arrayed them out, and just took some of the species and just a few. So that's how I created these. And then the next part is, of course, creating my mixes. You can see here I've already started to create them. I've already created them in my concept plant manager, but let's talk about how I did that. So the way I did this is we go to shrub areas and concept plant manager, and I'm actually going to go to shrub areas over here, and then, or sorry, shrubs, and then I am going to click new. And we get our concept plant info box for a new palette, and then I'm just going to call this, interior. Here, Dior, there we go. And you can give it a description, like when to plant it, information about what kind of soil it needs for later, instructions for the contractor, whatever you want in here. And we can pick a symbol. And what I kind of liked in here was I went for a symbol like this dash line or this dash line for the interior, and then I use the dash 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 for the exterior. So I'll show you how I did that. So I grabbed that dash line for the interior, and then I also wanted to, when I chose them, I chose an interior and an exterior that related. So you might want to do that with some of our other ones, like maybe this one and the same direction for the edge. So let's go interior, and I'm going to say okay. And I'm also, once I've done that, I'm going to start filling it with all my species. So I want all of these shrubs. I just click on it and drag them in. Click on it, drag them in. And we're going to keep going. And last one. There we go. And then I wanted my trees in here as well. I wanted all of my trees. There we go. So we've got all of this in here. We got to expand it a bit so we can still see that fill. And then basically I want to figure out the fill of this. So how do I do that? So I take this module that I created, and then I figured out how many herbaceous plants are in here. And the key here is that through the procedure, I decided to not actually, and I might actually do that here. I decided not to include the trees, so I'll take those out. I shouldn't have added them. I decided not to include the trees in the actual mix. However, just because this example is a bit smaller, if I had a larger space that trees fit more naturally, I would actually and maybe I can make a larger module, I probably would have included the trees in my plant mix. But in this case, I decided to not include them so that I could show them a bit better on the plant itself. So how do I figure out all of this percent fill? So I figured out how many herbaceous plants were in here by basically really easy selecting that, deselecting that, and opening up my properties. I'm filling up my whole screen and finding out there's 46 in there, 146 in there. So that's how I figured that out. Then I ran a schedule. So I did a plant schedule based on a work area. I placed a work area around it, did a plant schedule, and then basically took all the quantities here and divided them by 146, and I got my percentage. So we just click in here for the anemone, and we go 17%. And we click in here, and we've got 53% of the grass. And I say approximate because you do need whole numbers in here. So you don't really need to go crazy and do decimal places. 5%. There we go. So I kind of filled in all of those percentages. Really, really easy. And then that basically gives me so those are kind of my quantities in here. If I move this over here, I can place now this interior hatch, which is a mix, and I can call it out. And by the way, this call out that I'm going to use is actually still being developed a little bit, but you can access it. So if I click here, literally in the next few weeks, we're going to kind of push this out to everybody as normal. But you can see the quantities are almost bang on with those percentages for that exact same size square as what I filled in with plants. So that's the magic of and time savings now of having this as a mix. You can just place this wherever and you're going to get the correct number. So what I wanted to say, if you want this and you call this out and you're finding that it's not working, what you want to do is type user R1, enter, and you want to make that equal 1. If it equals 0, you're going to get our old label style, which is still technically live. But again, in the next few weeks, you won't have to do this anymore. So that's how I made that mix. Really, really easy. Step 1, step 2, step 3, done. And so basically what I also wanted to do was do the same thing for the edge, but I wanted to save myself a little bit of time. So all I did was I grabbed the interior, I clicked copy, and we called it edge. And we gave it any, it would also copy any of the notes. You can make any subtle changes that you wanted with the notes. And I go and I grab my dash line, and I chose this one before, so I'm going to grab that one now so it looks kind of similar, and say OK. And now we've got an edge. And I can basically, what I'm going to do is just delete the stuff that I don't want, which is I want to keep my anemone, my Danthonia, and I don't want my iris in here, and I don't want my false Solomon seal because that one's quite tall. Oops, not edit. I want to delete it from this mix. And I very quickly have a mix that's just like this, but a little different. And then I just figured out the exact same thing to figure out the percent fill, 22. 53 is 64 now. And this is now 14%. And that basically is exactly how I did that. It would work exactly just like that. So that is how I created these two mix. Of course, I name them something closer to what it is actually so that I can use it in the future with a similar kind of site because I probably work in the same sort of area. So that's how I did all of that. Let's see. We wanted to go into, now let's kind of place it around the site now that I've done it. So here is my strategy for placing this around the site. So I'm going to take all of that. I've got my site. I offset the edge of each of these planters in by about 2 feet or 0.6 meters, which is how I actually created this mix. 2 of these wide is about 0.6 meters. And so I kind of outlined that. So that's my edge everywhere. In some locations, I made a little more edge because it didn't make sense to have an interior in there. So I kind of finessed that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to place all of my interiors. So I'm just going to grab this one that I made before. And we're going to place it here. Oops. Of course I mess up on my very first click. There we go. And we're back. We go to place and we just click here. And click, click, click. I mean, like on a site like this, you might want to consider switching up the mix from one bed to another. And now you totally can. You can just make a few more copies. You can go through and basically go through there. And you can kind of play with it. You can have a few different mixes, maybe a different mix for right up against the building. But I'm going to do, this is how I did the edge. So I just go in here and you can actually do multiple. And I'm going to select the boundary, and we're going to select that boundary, and we're just going to click it in. And so multiple again, click that one, right click to accept, and we've got this going on. And then basically what I did, because again, these spaces were a little bit too tight in this example for me to want to use this for placing the trees, and I kind of wanted to show the structure of the trees in this plan, I decided to keep the trees as symbols. And so what I did is I took this box and these 2 trees, and I used X copy because I want to keep the data. Maybe I want to keep the data. And I basically pop those over, and I did snap them together, but I basically, or sorry, I didn't do it like that. I grabbed, because I don't want this to be a grid, I basically grab that, X copy. This is the new copy that works with land effects plants. X copy, super handy. Okay, let's actually snap. So I kind of did a long line, went along, and then I decided every other one is going to not have a tree. And then I kind of grabbed that one and I X copied again. And we grabbed in here and I kind of snapped it, right click or shift right click. And I chose nearest for a temporary snap and kind of just placed it in there and then placed it in here. It would have been longer. So you start to get that kind of, that look going on, and reveal. I got something like this. And basically what I did is I did that match properties again, and about half of the trees I made into the maple, the chalk maple. And then I basically kind of took that and overlaid it over top of one of these until a bunch fit that kind of made sense. And now this is actually pretty good for this bed as well, because with using these tree symbols as anchoring points, the contractor and you, when you're on site, because in this kind of case, you would need to be on site to make sure everything gets placed correctly. They can just basically use those trunks as anchoring for this pattern, especially in a slightly larger pattern like this. So they can kind of use that as guides of how the plants are going to kind of place in here. And that's basically how I did that. And that's a great system that basically kind of gets you all the plants that you need. You call both of them out, and it tells you exactly how many plants are in each kind of area, how many you need. And as an experiment, because we like making sure that we're not just saying things that aren't true, I did an experiment and I filled in one of these areas all with symbols. And let me tell you, that was long. But I mean, it was fun. So, I mean, you can maybe do this with one of the areas, spend your time wisely, so you can make an example area of what it's going to look like in the end. So you can make that nice screenshot image that I did before. Or maybe you do a more formal, realistic rendering with your rendering engine. You can do all of that because you can send this all to SketchUp. But I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But I kind of did an experiment, and so here's a schedule. And just so that you don't think, hey, Amanda, you just fudged all the numbers, if I go LA to open up my layers, and I go through here, and I get rid of my edge, just like that. And I basically rerun, oops, sorry, too much scrolling. I rerun my plant schedule and regenerate this schedule right here. You can see numbers all line up. So I didn't edit anything and cheat, but basically all of the numbers, sorry about the scrolling, all of the numbers line up. So if I kind of go over here and we compare this mouse to here, we are almost bang on with our mix in here. So I just, by placing a hatch, which literally took seconds, I saved myself, and I can tell you, an hour of time kind of putting all of that through. So that's a lot of dollars and cents right there. So we're going to go and so you can kind of go through, do that throughout your entire plan. That is the essence of creating a plan like this. I'm not going to kind of go through the whole thing, but you get the idea. And then basically at the end of the day, you can start running schedules. So I've started to place a few in here. But I can start running a schedule of this entire area now. And here's how we kind of run schedules, like I've shown you up there, when you're using plant mixes. If you want to learn more about plant mixes, we do have a great webinar that kind of goes through it. You do have some options when you're doing schedules with concept plants. So, I mean, the basic one is concept plant schedule, but that's not actually what we want to do here. Because this is a construction plan, I want a construction schedule with all of the information that I need. So I'm going to go to my planting, and I'm going to go plant schedule. And I am going to do a new schedule. I'm going to do drawing. I'm going to include my remarks in a column. I'm I am going to basically include symbol and code. I'm going to include all the names. I'm even going to include a detail in here, and you'll see how that's going to connect. So I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to click this work area. Oh, and I missed one very important thing, which is I'm going to include concept plants, of course. So you have some options here. You can do it by group, which I'll show you, or by plant, which I'll also show you. So if I do by group, so basically after you run your schedule, you're going to want to create a detail that kind of shows this area off. And so that the contractor can build all of this. So what you're going to do is you are going to go into and create a detail. So here's what I did to create a detail. I basically grabbed this area. So we grab this and we get rid of that. And I did a copy with base point right there, copy with base point, and I copied that. And I basically went over into module details, and I created a new drawing with in the units that I want for my detail. I copied in my plants. They're super tiny because I do details in millimeters. And so I just scaled them up by 1,000. So, you know, if you're doing feet versus inches, you'll probably have to scale them up as well. And I put that in, and then I basically created a schedule for these plants right here. And when I created that schedule for these plants right here, I basically did it all symbol, and I got rid of all of the information because I really didn't need that for a detail, and click that down. And because a very important point is that if you, when we place this detail into the regular plan, if there's also a legend in there, they're actually using the exact same block name, plant schedule 1. So they might overwrite each other. So I just exploded this so it's not a block anymore. And I don't need that title anyways in a detail that already has that title. So I just kind of put that in. And then how did I get this? Basically, I took this little module that I did, and I used our 3D connection. And I grabbed that 3D connection and I exported my trees and shrubs, and then I brought those into SketchUp. And if I were to kind of have a look, I picked some of these are actually all LandFX components in SketchUp. And it basically showed me exactly what my mix is going to look like. How awesome does that look? And then I did the exact same thing with here. And I just kind of attached the image into the detail. Put around a detail template and went to details and saved the detail in to the system. I'm going to overwrite, but kind of gave it a title, put it in a correct location. In this case, I put it into a project, but you might want to make this a standard detail that you possibly could use in another project. But, you know, I just kind of saved that in with the images as well. I made sure in particular that these images were XREF'd in with a full path so that the image shows up when you place the detail. And then I went over to my modular planting and we went into details. And we went in and we just kind of opened up my detail manager. I have them in here, but you just click new and you grab them and you add them to the project. And now I can kind of go in here, do my detail number, click it down, and there it is. And I can put this on a sheet with a viewport with my planting on it if I want, and the whole schedule for everything. But I can basically place both of these in here so that I can reference them on the field on exactly what those look like, how that module is all put together so that they can kind of coordinate with the trunks of the trees or however you have them coordinating. I considered some other ideas like maybe keeping a dashed line of the grid or around this, when I keep these around when I place them on the actual bed, especially since this one's so irregular. So that people could do it. So that's basically what I did. And the last thing is that once you create all of these, I've been talking about being able to use them again. If you want to be able to use them again, it's really easy. You make a template. So you make a whole bunch of these mixes and maybe you build them over time. But in the end, what you want to do is go to FX admin, go to your project list while this project is open where your mixes are in. And then you want to go ahead and click and save as template. And maybe this is your alkaline mixes, for example, and say, okay, template created, and there it is at the bottom for you to be able to go into your concept manager and just click import and go to that template and import from that template. So you can import one of these and then make a few little tweaks. Change the percent fill maybe, make a new module, go wild, have fun. That's the point here, is that you're making something really, really amazing, but you're also having fun doing it. And let's kind of line up for questions. Just one moment though, I do want to try out that thing so I can show, because I was a little trying to think and now I've got my head together. So I'm just going to make a new one of these, like you said, Jer, and add that to the project. Done. And sure, why not? And we're just going to place that in here. Place that in here. Schedule and regenerate the existing schedules. No. Here we go. By group. Okay, so we'll go here. By group. There we go. We will have a look at that, guys. So you can see here how it's organizing it by group. It's showing the group name, the total quantity, and the individual quantities. Keeping in mind, if you ever want to do seed, just don't put a spacing, and it will show the square footage of seed. And then you can also see the remarks of the area. I can also do a schedule by plant. So if I don't regenerate and go by plant, and click OK, I can click on this one and it will actually list it out as if it were individual plants. There we go, as if it were individual plants. So really, really powerful tool. You can hand this list over to your contractor because it actually organizes all the plants together, even if they are shared among multiple different mixes. So that's really powerful too. That was actually a specific request from a client while we were developing this tool. But yeah, let's move over to questions then.
Yeah, well, I think you pretty much covered the questions there. I mean, obviously, people want to see that that schedule there, and you know, it's weird. I just ran a test and it ran fine over here. So obviously, we will track down exactly what caused that. So anyway, but the good news is that all worked. Yeah, I just one thing is just Amelia was a little confused when you were copying the trees. It was just kind of confused on what it was you were showing with that.
Oh, sure. Let me show you then. So let's make an example over here, and I'm going to basically fill in this area with trees in particular. So I'm going to go over here and grab this kind of copy around that I did of a bunch of these, and I kind of grabbed that and I X-copied again, X-copy, and I kind of grabbed that and I laid it over. So basically what I'm doing here is, one, I don't want to snap, so I hit F3 to turn off snaps, but I'm looking at those trunks and I'm figuring out them kind of going in here. And basically I experimented with this mix a little bit, and I figured out that in this space, for the spacing of large trees, I would probably want about 2 in this space, 2 to 3. So I'm basically kind of overlaying it until these look really good and kind of experimenting and moving it. I could try over here for some different species, but basically I kind of grabbed one of them. Let's go with, do I have a lot of large trees in here? Oh, they're a little bit up. There we go. And I kind of did that. And then, I mean, it helps if you don't have too much going on in the background while you're doing this, but I can, as you can see, but I went through and kind of just got rid of some of these, and especially like that one's landing on a spot I don't want it, and I kind of grabbed in here. Let's grab all of these. I do want that, and I'm going to leave the squares so that we can reference, maybe make that choice to use those as a reference point for the contractor as he's filling in all of the mixes. But see, this tree is kind of falling on the edge, so I'm getting rid of it. And this one is too, and we kind of go through, that one's on the edge. So I end up with about, I can probably fit about 6 Cercis. I might want to limit that down to just 5, which is what I ended up going with, and kind of getting rid of those squares and maybe move them to a different layer that's gray and dashed, so that that's kind of a reference of the modules on here. But that's basically how I filled in all of those trees in here. However, if I were to include the trees in the mix, this is what I did. So let's open up my concept manager. And then I went to the interior and we added those trees in. Oops, added those trees in. There we go. There we go. And so for the 2 taller ones, I can actually go above 100% here. So I basically typed in 50% for that, and it's warning me I'm going over 100%, but I wanted to because I'm layering these. And then actually, technically, this Cercis is a 3rd layer. So it's about 100. It won't show up, but it will register 100. You can type 99 if you really want it to show up there. But I basically did that, and that's how I got this call out right here. You can see, oh, not that call out. But if I were to grab one of these and kind of, it got really, really close. So if I grabbed, I'm going to do an N copy to grab this one. Oh, not that one. I'm just going to grab this one and fill in the interior over here. Yep, I'll change it. There we go. And we labeled that one over here. It ends up saying that I about need 1 maple and 1 ash, and then in this space in particular, 3 of those Cercis. So you can absolutely do it this way too. I just felt in such a small space like this, I actually did want the symbols in order to give the plan a bit more structure.
I think it does look better with the trees now. But wouldn't it also behoove you to knock out the hatch around those trunks just to get a, I mean, you're only what, 6 or 7 plants off, but would that be worth the effort to have the hatch not fill in the trunks there?
I mean, I haven't experimented with that in particular, but what I did find is that based off of the procedure that I took to actually create the mix in the first place, those trunks were already notched out in this procedure. So I was actually calculating all of the percent fills based off of those trunks being knocked out. So even after, so this is actually calculating up to 100%, even though they're technically not filling the space 100%. So that they actually got, that's how this is pretty much bang on, because it is actually knocking out, even though the hatch is underneath there. So yeah, it would probably, you could play with it and experiment it to figure out what is more accurate for your tastes.
And then, one last comment, which is true. James mentions, it sure be neat to be able to do, a rendering of the space. And actually, I'm not sure if he's really meaning actually 3D or color rendering. But I think, either would have the same issue of basically how to pull that off. And I wonder, maybe you could start with sort of that initial SketchUp rendering that you did, and maybe really it's almost more of a Photoshop technique or something to try to fill in the rest of the space with that. Maybe you even when you sent it to SketchUp, you could grab that arrangement of 3D components and just kind of manually copy them to fill the other areas.
Yeah, whichever one. I feel like, and to get this, basically I did, let's see, yeah, I did this image based off of, obviously, this fill-in. So that's maybe what might make it worth your time to at least do one fill-in so that the client can see what each bed is going to look like. And then, but I feel like you have to kind of make that decision then. Is it worth your time to fill in the entire space with actual symbols like that at this point with the tools that you have? And if it is worth it, then go for it. You've already gained a lot through this webinar in terms of figuring out how to make the mix itself. And maybe you then use the hatch to try and kind of figure out how many are in here. I actually just overlaid all of that grid to kind of figure it out, but you could at least use the mix to figure out how many trees are supposed to be in here too. There's a lot of tools that you can kind of come away with this here and decide which actual workflow is going to work best for you. We just wanted to show you one that is pretty fast, so you can, if maybe your client isn't paying you for a full rendering of the entire site, which is also really labor intensive on your computer, by the way, to have that many symbols in SketchUp, then you might want to forgo that, but still get the end result of actually planting it.
Yeah, fantastic. What a cool technique. Well, cool. Well, hey, you know what? That wraps us up. So thank you, everybody, for attending. If you think of any questions over the weekend, feel free to email us and, let us know and give us your thoughts as you experiment with this yourself. And other than that, just have a great weekend, everybody.